Ladies and gentlemen, the climate crisis is not coming. The climate crisis is here. Our generation will likely know the success or failure of the efforts we place to address human impacts on the environment. Future generations will be able to look back on what we have done, a world that we will make for them, but not yet fully know, a world that they will know, but cannot anymore change. This keynote will discuss the prospects for digital remembering of our time before the climate crisis for the generations that come after it. Their perspectives will depend on the records and the archives and the practices which we put in place to create, curate, and hand them on. And I'm going to approach a topic which, many of you are familiar with. The expertise is in the room on this topic rather than me on the stage. I'm going to approach it as almost an outsider. My background is rather more on the digital preservation, the research data management side than the media management side here. So I'll ask some questions. My knowledge is incomplete, right? But at that intersection between digital preservation and media management, we're going to find lots of good ideas and lots of things to talk about. Standing in the way of us achieving that shared goal of handing on a digital memory are numerous challenges which we face in developing economically and environmentally sustainable preservation. So in terms of a presentation, I'm going to just do a word or two around digital preservation as a theme, just get us all on the same page. Then I'm going to talk really about two aspects of sustainability. I'm going to talk about economy and I'm going to talk about climate. And the final part I'm going to talk about sustainability is about people. And we'll put all those three things together and we'll end with, I suppose, a bit of a call for action and a bit of an offer of support. So let's start at the beginning. Let me try to unpack this question about digital preservation. By digital preservation, I'm going to refer to all of the series of actions necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary, beyond the limits of media degradation, technical obsolescence, and organisational change. It's a fairly familiar definition to you, perhaps, but let's unpack the concepts in here. Firstly, it's a series of actions, not a single task, and certainly not an application. You can't buy digital preservation. It's a commitment that you make. It's a managed series of activities. So there's some management protocol in there. There's tolerances for risk and for quality. And there's some reporting around those. It's also not explicit where these activities happen. This is an important observation. Okay, a lot of this is going to happen in the archives, but we all know that a lot of it has to happen before the archive. In fact, if we sort of leave some of this to the archives, it will already be too late in many cases. So what we're looking at here is a program, subtly, a program of organisational change. It can encompass decisions across a whole organisation. It's about continued access. Okay, so it's more not just backup, right? A number of times we get digital preservation and backup confused. It has users in there for whom access has to be meaningful. So it adds expectations of usability, renderability, authenticity. It's not about everything, and it's not about forever. It's not just digitization, although digitization creates a digital preservation need. And the use case is not simply about years into the future. The time frame here is defined by processes over which we have no control. Media degradation, perhaps, or organisational change. So lots of agencies who don't think of themselves as memory institutions in the traditional sense, or archives in the traditional sense, have a digital preservation requirement. I'm fond of telling people that Bacardi is a member of the Digital Preservation Coalition. It's a bit early in the morning for Bacardi, but hey. Not any other Bacardi than the one you're thinking of. Because if you want to sell 40-year-old whiskey to the People's Republic of China, you've got to be able to demonstrate that that stuff really is 40 years old. And you don't want to be arguing with the customs official by hacking around in a legacy stock management system. It's not an archive in the traditional sense, but the business case for that material is much longer than the infrastructure on which the records are created. So there's a lot packed in to this relatively simple statement. What are the challenges that we face? I'm going to take two of them. I want to talk about sustainability. I'm going to unpack that in the context of economy and then in relation to the environment. Economy. If you approach digital preservation as a newcomer, you might think that it's a constant war over the PDF file format. You know, we love a good argument about metadata or file formats. An interesting but somewhat niche discussion. And it's true that these topics matter, okay? It's really important that we have some of these conversations. And they're very well represented in the literature and at the conferences. But money turns out to be the biggest challenge facing our digital heritage. And I'm sure you all have examples of this. I'm sure, let's have a show of hands of people in the room who have too much money. Never works. I'm hoping to meet that person one day. Lots of examples. Here's one you might find familiar. UK Web Archive at the British Library. It's gathered under statute, okay, so they're doing it under law in an organisation which is established also by legislation, with a network, including Trinity, by the way, in Dublin, which is there to safeguard the published collections, including online. The archive at the UK Web Archive at the British Library grew from, in 2013, 365,000 collections, that's work files, to 14 million in 2018, 5 years, a 38-fold increase. This has not been met by a 38-fold increase in funding. Look me in the eye and tell me we need to do more with less. But the economic challenge is greater and more subtle than perhaps we have imagined. Because to me, digital preservation is to some extent a response to economic forces that propelled the digital shift in the first place. It's a symptom of accelerating cycles of innovation, adoption, and disruption which characterize information technology, where obsolescence is taken for granted and infrastructures become disposable. So here we are worrying about file formats and metadata while business has happily been creating and dismantling the digital world for us, overseeing the deletion of swathes of digital content in response to business pressures. If you really want to see the long list of data which has been lost over the years, it's more likely to be found in a long list of discontinued services than a short list of entirely unrecoverable file formats. We might as well mention Twitter in this context. Show of hands of anyone who's been following the story on Twitter recently. Last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, we learned from Elon Musk that he intends to delete inactive Twitter accounts, defined by Twitter, by the way, as anything which hasn't been used in the last 30 days, so that they can resell high-value usernames. Now, that might sound like the closure of a few dormant accounts, but the consequence is the reckless endangerment of enormous swathes of the public sphere, all to create a synthetic market for usernames. It's like burning the civic realm in order to sell personalized number plates. And this is just the latest example, and probably not the worst. We're told, seemingly as an afterthought, not to worry because the old accounts will be archived. And it raises more questions than it answers. Archived by whom and for how long? And how might the archives be accessed? And how can we be sure that they won't be altered in the archiving process? And what will happen if the archive is challenged to delete or to correct an entry? How might legitimate users such as corporate archives or surviving family members access the archive and exercise legitimate control? Let's remember that the Library of Congress was offered the Twitter archive around 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now. The Library of Congress, the biggest library in the world, and it couldn't cope with the scale of the collection because it didn't have the infrastructure to make such a huge data set usable. remember that Twitter does not have a copy of Twitter. What about accounts that were created to support one-off events or short-duration political campaigns, which are dormant but incredibly important for what they reveal to us about who we are, how we live, and what we voted for? I can imagine quite a few politicians and corporations quite keen for their public pronouncements to be conveniently disappeared. It raises questions for large organisations in public life and personal connections in private life. And it's naive to think of Twitter as merely a flood of messages. It overlooks the connectedness and patterns of behaviours which are often more revealing. And we're told that this will apply to materials that have seen no activity for several years. It's not at all what this means, and it's not at all clear, therefore, what's in scope for this mass extinction. I'm having a go at Twitter here because it's easy to do that. And it's in the news. But it's not just Twitter it's not just one company making some ill-judged, high-profile decisions. This is a structural issue. Remember, taking a wee detour here, a wee tangent, remember the crazy mismatch that exists between share valuation and between share valuation and balance sheets. So this is Facebook. Facebook was floated in March 2012 at around $104 billion US dollars when it was sold in the stock market, with $6 billion of tangible assets. Pause for a moment on that. Almost $100 billion of intangible assets. It's grown since then, of course. It tipped the $1 trillion mark in 2021 as a company valuation before losing $232 billion in a single day, February 2022. I'm not expecting Facebook to go anywhere, but that's $250 billion. It's a massive change in value in a single moment. We've never had to deal, I think, with anything quite like that. My point here, going back to the question of sustainability and economics, the value of companies is ephemeral. The flight of capital is inevitable, and thereby follows the loss of data. Extinction as a service. Let's move on. This is all very bleak. As you can tell, I didn't sleep much last night. Let's talk about climate. Let's talk about the environment. That'll be better. That'll be cheerier. Economic dysfunction is not unlinked to the climate crisis. And the climate crisis is a reason for doing digital preservation better and doing it in the first place. It stands to reason, here's just a nice picture. It stands to reason that we would want, this was, by the way, Ben Lomond. I was sitting looking out in Glasgow Airport last night, and it just looked lovely, and I thought I'd like to be there rather than sitting in the departure lounge for a Ryanair flight that's not showing up. So anyway, that's why you've got that picture. It stands to reason that we'd want to preserve environmental data because its value and its usefulness actually expands through time. But research institutes which publish environmental data often face challenge by organisations and vested interests which consider it unwelcome. The carbon lobby, who have provided sustained denial of service attacks to the services and to the reputations of climate science. So climate science isn't devoid of bad actors. Transparency is essential. And I'm not sure we always get that. So here's a short story. I spoke last year at the fringes of COP26 about archives and climate change. Later in the workshop, a consultant posted a seemingly useful, actionable insight that observing that email creates carbon, sending too many emails was putting the planet at risk, and to put a slogan on it, think before you thank. This sounds like great news to me. Is it 6 billion emails a day or something are posted, and I get copied into half of them as far as I can tell. It's very eye-catching, but it seems curious to me. The established wisdom is that carbon footprint of a digital activity derives from the source of the energy and the carbon locked into the devices rather than the nature or the size of the digital outputs. In this case, the claim is being quoted from an IT consultant who in turn had derived a statistical claim from research which had been commissioned by a company called OVO. OVO is one of the largest energy firms in the UK, and critics report that it offers power generation with an above average carbon footprint. That seems relevant. This line of thinking quite ostentatiously passes responsibility for carbon reduction onto the user and makes no commitment or no comment whatsoever on what the energy firms should be doing. In media, this is called framing. We're being framed. Energy firms have a reputation for suggesting users change their behaviours while not addressing issues of their own. In January 2022, OVO advised customers to reduce their energy bills by cuddling pets for warmth, challenging the kids to a hula hoop competition. It's hilarious stuff if it wasn't so serious. Doing star jumps and cleaning the house. At the same time, it made a profit of £600 million and paid its chief executive £1.2 million. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what the debate is like. A nuanced discussion about the carbon costs of archival storage was derailed by a third-hand repetition of an unconvincing but eye-catching claim based on research promoted by an energy firm heavily invested in carbon. A little bit of transparency would go an awfully long way. What about the carbon footprint of all those bits and bytes that we're looking after? Digital preservation has a habit of having sort of binary preservation. That's to say, things are either preserved or they're not. Repositories are trusted or they're not. Every touch point in a digital preservation workflow requires some sort of energy: ingest, migration, access. So as well as reducing data volumes, we might want to think, how many times do we process a file? How many times do we touch or open up a document, a digital object? Migration, for example. Should we migrate and normalize files on receipt at the repository, or do we migrate only when the need arises? There are arguments both ways depending on the specific case, but it's time that we included energy costs of migrating files into our discussions. There are some high value or high risk environments where the chain of custody really matters, and you'd want to monitor the integrity of files more or less continuously. But computing across large data sets requires massive processor time, and that means more energy. Instant access means spinning disks, and global instant access means data cached in locations around the world. Spinning disks are very intensive for energy consumption as against other types of storage, but those other types of storage are typically slower in terms of delivery. So slower access and managing the expectation of users might become an issue, but potentially healthier for the planet. What I'm arguing here is we need to admit potentially more grey areas in preservation. Files which are checked occasionally, formats that are migrated but only on demand, access which is slower but potentially more sustainable. So if you'll permit me to mix my metaphors, I'm looking for some grey areas so we can unlock some green spaces. That leads me to remember that this seminar, this workshop, all of our work is about a socio-technical problem. And the solutions will be vested not only in tools but in people. And I want to look more closely across how we can work between our many sectors. Any contemporary survey in archives will tell you that archivists have low confidence in digital skills and that digital preservation is, on balance, the least developed skill set of all. A survey by the UK and Jessica in the UK by Jessica and TNA in 2019 spelled this out. The majority of archives in the UK are not working to a dedicated digital preservation strategy. Most report organisational buy-in as a significant barrier to developing digital skills. And rightly or wrongly, archivists claim that their archival qualifications have failed to prepare them with digital skills, even amongst those who graduated after 2010. The consequence, at least in 2019, 67% of archives in the UK were not taking steps to preserve digital documents, and 87% had no plans for web archiving. That's set against massive increases in data volumes and data production and data consumption. global data volumes continue on an exponential curve, which is estimated to add around 50% more content every 2 years. And it's not just the volume. The AI question was really interesting there at the outset. It's not just the data volumes, it's also the complexity. Non-database sources, video streaming, voice assistants, Internet of Things devices, all of these have led to an explosion in data diversity, which cripples traditional approaches to data warehousing. That's why the AI tools become much more interesting. So, anyway, skills are in short supply, and getting out ahead of, and skills are in short supply, but instead of getting out ahead of the problem, practice seems to be falling behind. Digital memory is in trouble not because we don't know what to do, but because we urgently need a flexible and skilled workforce that can respond to the challenge. And that's where agencies like DPC and Fiat IFTA can begin to help. For many years now, really since we were founded, the DPC has supported training. Over the years, this has grown from simply publishing the Digital Preservation Handbook to a much wider and much more integrated program of workforce development with training and grants and resources, which has reached many thousands of people. In 2020, an online training pathway called Novice to Know-How, which was funded by the National Archives in the UK, gave free access and replaced a much more analogue training roadshow, which literally was me with a railway ticket. Entry-level training has been supplemented with more advanced tool demos, and there's roadmaps for deep dives into substantive content, such as email preservation modules, which will be released in July. There is no end of demand. And I wonder whether that's something we should be doing together. First aid for AV. We've certainly heard from many of our members that they have an appetite for a training on this topic. It's also striking that everyone is a media manager now. Everyone needs media managers and archivists now. Since the pandemic, and for many years before, to be honest, all manner of video and audio content has been accumulating in institutions and agencies, so that even if they don't realize it, they're all AV curators, they all have an AV preservation issue. Training has an important contribution to make to tackle some of those issues, and I have no doubt that the current resources are impactful, but on their own they won't make the change. They won't make a lasting structural change. Bear in mind that digital preservation, really all preservation is contingent. It's not enough to have skills now, but it's also important to have a pathway for the renewal and upgrading of skills too, as well as continuity and succession planning for existing staff. And that in part has encouraged us to develop a competency framework and a competency audit tool for digital preservation practitioners. You'll have a good acronym at the DPC, you know. So the Competency Audit Toolkit is immediately called the RAM and has led to any number of CAT-based GIFs. Multiple different professional frameworks in our sectors I'm aware of. I mean, the DigCurve framework, for example, and the framework by the Archives and Records Association. But as noted, digital preservation is not all or only about archives, and arguably we need to engage across an entire organisation or entire sectors. These tools are useful for practitioners who want to benchmark their own capability, and arguably over the longer term a new professional community will emerge here. We can already discern specialisms like web archiving or research data management developing into distinct specialisms within digital preservation. However, by identifying skills gaps, it challenges institutions to more effective recruitment, and it targets training providers to more impactful curricula. It points the finger to the right skills in the right place, that the preservation needs to be embedded across a whole production life cycle, and therefore to become everyone's problem. So while there may be beneficial outcomes for individuals from these sorts of tools, the longer forecast is about much, much more. In the final analysis, these capabilities are not for the sake of an emerging profession or even for the sake of the bits and the bytes. We invest in them because of the people and the opportunity, not because of the fear of a digital dark age, but because we want to come good on the digital promise. The climate crisis reminds us that long-term thinking matters, and that long-term thinking needs longer-term skills. There's never been a more important time to take our stand with the future. Thank you very much.